Hello, I'm Paul Michael Glazer, and you are watching Mr. Media.
Today on Mr. Media, I'll talk to artist and graphic novelist Peter Kuper, whose new book collects his Big Apple work from over the years. It's called Drawn to New York. Stick around, it's a hell of a town. Mr. Media is recorded live before an audience of stick figure drawers who are blind to the difference between what they create and what artist Peter Kuper does in the new media capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida. If you love the speed, contradictions, dangers, and delights of Manhattan, you'll find a lot to love in artist Peter Kuper's new graphic collection, Drawn to New York. Now, I only hesitate to call it a graphic novel because it's so much more than a single comic story, or even stories, in book form. Now, my power with words probably won't do justice to the remarkable variety of artistic styles and messages found in Kuper's book. So let me give you just a few examples of what's inside, and then Peter will join us to explain. There's an illustration of the Empire State Building, tipped upside down and looking more like a hypodermic needle. In one short story, Kuper and a friend climb the suspension bands on the Brooklyn Bridge late at night, only to end the evening with a less than celebratory hooker. We also get an idea of what would happen if a modern-day Tarzan came to New York. And Kuper shows us how a little old lady came to be crossing a busy street alone late at night. Now, there are also myriad single-page illustrations and graphics that could probably be turned into a series of standalone posters, such as Mickey Mouse standing amidst the chaos of the city saying, "Remain calm," which in retrospect reminds me of kind of the end of Animal House and Kevin Bacon. Another helpful sketch is called Odorama, a visual guide to city smells, and you can use your imagination to figure out what that's about. Now, this is Peter Kuper's second visit to Mr. Media. He was actually one of the podcast's very first guests back in 2007, promoting his graphic novel, Stop Forgetting to Remember. And I always have to look at that because it's just clever enough that I know I'm going to screw it up if I don't actually read it. Peter Kuper, welcome back to Mr. Media.
Thank you.
I just can't imagine how you managed to find so much material in the city that never sleeps. Imagine that.
Yes, it's rather bottomless, actually. And I keep a sketchbook handy at all times, so even while I'm on the subway, I have a chance to draw, and no downtime in New York.
No.
And so much inspiration.
Well, one of the things I wondered, did you ever, over the years, and the book covers a long period of time, from the time you arrived to more recent, but one of the things that I wondered in going through it was, did you ever deliberately put yourself out late at night or in the early hours of the morning just to see what the city looked like and to sketch, or?
Not necessarily to sketch, although on occasion, but more like to climb the Brooklyn Bridge in my wilder, youthful days. And I like to find dark corners in New York, and it's very difficult to find places that aren't fully populated, and or go down some street that hasn't been walked a million times. So I did find over the years, I did look for places like that, and it was more like they made their way into stories rather than me standing on the corner and sketching. But I did some of that too.
On the assumption you're familiar with it, what's the difference between Peter Kuper's New York and Will Eisner's New York?
It's not always raining in my New York, but it does quite a bit. Actually, he's certainly an influence on the way I see New York, along with people like Saul Steinberg. There's a lot of artists that have covered the city, but Eisner, really at the top of the list, because in his work, New York is really a character, and I see it that way as well. It's like a it stands alongside the people, and it's very often a very organic animal, and it kind of roars at you sometimes, and seems to be inviting at other times. And I still feel like a tourist here. It's a really funny experience, but I think it's one of the reasons why I love living in the city so much, because I just feel like I'm traveling all the time. Because if even a month goes by, if I go downtown again, the neighborhoods change, and it's definitely not everybody's cup of tea. But in my case, I'm both the inmate and the guard.
Well, I mean, anyone who's been in New York knows it's kind of the world in a snapshot, because from block to block you're going to see every cuisine imaginable. There are whole neighborhoods that have changed over the years. You know, Chinatown, of course, has been a constant, but I don't know. You tell me. I'm thinking there's probably a little Vietnam and little Korea and endless variation.
Yeah. Well, more so if you go out into Brooklyn and Queens, you find these pockets that are really particularized. You have like a Jamaican area that's really, it's like stepping off the boat, and you can get that all over the 5 boroughs. In Manhattan, it's a little more specific, and you get Little Italy and Chinatown, and but yeah, there are pockets of those communities where people live their whole lives and don't actually speak English, and don't have to go much further than 3 blocks to cover everything that they need to sort of remain in their country.
Do you ever go a week in the city without encountering a New York character? I hate to use the quote marks, but
it's impossible. I have a studio. My studio is is 3 blocks from my apartment, and so I do the walk every day. And there's never a time that I don't walk past what they call SROs, single room occupancy buildings that tend to have they're a repository for interesting cartoon characters, and so you just constantly having. New York is the kind of place where you cannot avoid encounters. They come to you. And there's also, I always joke about the $20 walking out the door fee. It's impossible to get out the door and get back inside without somehow having spent some money.
I heard, gosh, I wish I could think of who this was. Someone was doing some comedian was talking about how you couldn't leave your house, that you wanted to take that it's $4 or $5 to take the bus here, $4 or $5 for a transfer here, blah, blah. And someone. I wish I could give credit on this, but he was saying that he went to. He was going to some theater, and he left the house with $30 in his pocket, and arrived with only $4 left, and couldn't afford to buy the ticket to go in for the show he was planning to go to. It's not a cheap place.
No, it's not a cheap place. It's true, and it's also, it tends to be sometimes it's like trying to push you out. When I lived in Mexico for 2 years, and when we got back, our landlord was trying to evict us and had actually put a camera outside our door to say, say you weren't there. And it wasn't, we hadn't done anything illegal, but they managed to spend 4 years in an attempt to get us out of there. And I just thought, oh yes, this is part of the $20 walking out the door fee, except slightly elevated. And it's just, real estate is the thing that it is in New York that's pretty unique, and seems to be unaffected by whatever happens in the economy. And but I was noticing walking down the street just last night that every block has 2 or 3 stores that are empty, and it's really becoming you get to see the microcosm of what's happening in the country and sometimes in the world. You get to see waves of migration. Say, for example, there was a Dominican migration wave, and the building next to me was all Dominican. And then there was another wave, and it was all people from Pueblo, Mexico. And it was interesting to watch.
That specific.
It was that specific, yeah. And so you get to see these things happening. But when the economy shook, although rents didn't go down per se, you got to see real evidence of places emptying out. And then I'll get a sense of how the economy goes up or down, and based on what happens in the near future. So there usually is kind of it's a little ahead of the curve for the rest of the country.
Tell me about, and we're talking in general about New York because what you get from the book is a flavor. So I want to explain to people I'm not just having a casual conversation with you about New York just because I have nothing else to ask you about. Just but I mean, are you a New Yorker who knows his neighbors, who talks to people, or do you pick a point as you're walking and look at it and then not look at other people, or what do you like on the streets?
I'm definitely the involved. I made a promise to myself I wasn't going to ever walk by a homeless person and not at least note, if not give them some money or something like that. I certainly have walked past a lot of people without giving them money, but I still note, and I find it impossible to, maybe it's my personality type, but I have association with many of my neighbors, and we have sort of they're the people that have stayed in the building I'm now in one building for 31 years. And so you have that group of people, and then there's waves of new people coming through. But I generally don't mind being out there in the world that way and having the interactions. And I don't have to commute every day, so it hasn't pushed my buttons to the point that I can't stand it. But I teach at the School of Visual Arts, and I do my morning commute to go there once a week, and that's so I get that kind of association, and I like. This is where it's really not everybody's place, because if you didn't want to rub shoulders with people, this would definitely not be your town.
Yeah. Well, so it is your town now, but you opened the book talking about how you came to be here and make some family connections. Tell folks where you came from and why the city did beckon you. Why are you in the city and not in Pueblo, New Mexico, or somewhere else?
Well, I was in
migration.
I was in Oaxaca for 2 years, so that was my one big move out of the city. But I was born in New Jersey, but I grew up in Cleveland, and in fact encountered Harvey Picar there when I was about 11, and he was a hospital worker before he had ever done American Splendor. And I met Robert Crumb when he came through town when I was about 12, and got to interview him for my fanzine. I visited New York when I was maybe 8, and I think this works for some people. It just immediately got its claws in me. The vibe of New York in the 60s, the intensity of it just made my blood boil in the right direction, and I just thought I want to be around this. And pretty much when I first chance I had. When I was 18, I came to New York, and Cleveland is a fine place to grow up, but I was not sorry to leave. And no offense to all my friends in Cleveland, but it's a good stepping stone because there's a lot of culture there, and certainly it's a hotbed for comics. Simon and Schuster were there, Crumb was there, Harvey Picar was there, and so there's something in the water in Cleveland that obviously has some sort of comic book friendly fluoride, but New York is kind of like the ultimate jolt of that, and I wanted to be close to that feeling. Mm-hmm. And I think when I first got here, it was really daunting, and I just felt quite overwhelmed, and I thought, okay, this is going to crush me, and I'll be going back to Cleveland anytime now. But happily, for a number of trips forward, I managed to stay there, and my friend Seth Bachman, who lived one street away from me in Cleveland, had moved there and was in film school, and I started in art school, and then he joined me there, and we started World War III Illustrated, which we're still doing to this day. In fact, only last night we were working on a new anthology together. So it's like and that goes back to us doing a fanzine when we were in Cleveland. Mm-hmm. So we've had a long lineage of this. Can't seem to get magazines or a place like New York out of our blood.
And it's not my practice to correct a guest, but I want to just be sure. You mentioned Simon and Schuster. I'm guessing you meant Siegel and Schuster.
I meant Siegel. Yes, sorry.
Right.
Not the publisher, the authors, but
just I know that you knew the difference, and I wanted to let people know that we both knew the difference.
Thank you.
So yeah, not a problem. Now, do you So this book covers how many years worth of work?
It's 30 years. The earliest drawings in there are from my sketchbook from 30 years ago, and some of the earliest work that I did. That some of it ended up in World War III. Some of it, a good portion of it, never ended up anywhere. Just drawings and ideas and things like that, paintings, and I did a whole series of paintings on windows that were initially, I was looking out my window one day, and it just struck me that the breakup of a window is not dissimilar to the way a comic is broken up. Mm-hmm. And I started, it was just at a time when they were basically retooling New York and coming with these new kinds of windows, and there were old windows on the street everywhere, and it just fit neatly. So I collected windows and started doing these paintings. So things like that that have sort of never seen the light of day are in there.
One of those has, it's split in 6 panels, and it has comic characters from the teens and 1920s. I'm thinking, oh, Bob.
Crazy Cat.
Crazy Cat, yes. And,
yep.
The
Maggie and Jigs.
Yeah.
Polly and her pals.
Yep.
Yep.
And they turn up also in another illustration, I think, on the subway, right?
Uh-huh, yep. Yeah, well, that history of comics in New York, but also in that case, I painted it on the window because I wanted to make the direct lineage between, just so people demonstrate, like cartoons, window pane breakup, they're like panels, and so that people would make that connection obviously.
How many different, you probably haven't counted this, but how many different mediums did you work in that's represented in this book, do you think? And describe, if you would, there's obviously, I think there's watercolors, there's painting, there's sketching.
Yeah, I did a lot of stencil and spray paint, which I did for about 20 years, and then I stopped doing that when I was living in Mexico, and I just found that it struck me as being a wise health move to get away from
the fumes,
highly toxic spray paint. There's acrylic painting, there's a lot of collage, and then tons of pen and ink, colored pencil. I basically, I tend to get very restless in any one medium. There's a lot of scratchboard drawing, which I still do quite a bit of. I think, in that way, the city also appeals to me because it's got that complete mashup of so many different styles and so many different cultural impacts, and modern and classic, and it's all going on sort of simultaneously. Mm-hmm. And so it fit neatly that the book would have all those different styles going on. And I don't try to, I'm not trying to do it just for the difference. It's really, boredom is a big factor, but also I'm really interested in, especially with comics, in all the different possibilities of exploring the medium. And so I really am interested in journalism and autobiography and dreams, fantasy, and as much real personal experience as I can put into it. And so that in the same way I experiment with different styles, I also like to experiment with different approaches to using comics.
Mm-hmm. There's quite a bit, I guess, in the second half of the book that's inspired by 9/11 and the obviously the attacks on New York. Those have a very different look. Obviously, they're somewhat darker for understandable reasons. Were you using different materials at that time because of what you were? Obviously, you use materials that are appropriate for the subject. I'm thinking those were probably very different than what you had done previously. At least it's represented.
It was more like the vibe than the materials. It was what was in the stories and the content. Because in general, it's really the same things that I used even as early as with something like Scratchboard. I was doing that in the early '80s, and there's some earlier works in there that are of the same sort of actual anxiety that I think was in the later work. I had a lot of just the feeling of New York in the '80s. When I first arrived in New York, was just coming out of bankruptcy. There was, in fact, the month that I arrived, there was a garbage strike that was going on had been going on for 2 weeks. So the place was wall-to-wall
Yeah.
garbage.
Oh, I remember.
Hats hung everywhere. The whole place looked like a scene from Shaft, and then there was the blackout that happened within a month of me arriving, and I was like, "This is my town." And that was reflected in the artwork that I did in the '80s when there was a tremendous amount of homelessness, and there was and also then there was the excitement of the art scene that was happening on the Lower East Side, and all the possibilities of the way people were being influenced by that environment was making for a lot of creative responses. And so I think that there were periods in New York's history that carried that same emotional quality, but of course 9/11 was very particular for a period of time there where the whole city all at once, of all strata, it didn't matter whether you were rich or poor, everybody was impacted by that.
The one I particularly like, and if I got this wrong, I apologize. But it's called Indomitable Human Spirit.
Yes.
It starts very dark, and then it ends pretty much. I mean, I related to this greatly because it starts pretty dark, and things are gloomy, and then I don't know. Can we give away what happens at the end?
Oh, it's okay. You can.
Yeah.
No, well, there was a moment where just checking out a hot woman sort of brought me back to reality. Like, yes, we will go on with our human nature will continue even while we're nail biting. And that actually, at the time that I did that strip, I really wasn't sure that I wanted to even publish it because the idea came to me, and I just thought, oh, that just seems wrong because I'm in general, I'm really glad that I have gotten as many things down on paper as I have at the time, because it's like there's the history, an emotional history of a certain time period. It disappears and it becomes remote. And so how I felt right after 9/11, the drawings I did then are really particular to that feeling. And when I look at them now, it's even somewhat difficult for me to conjure up the exact sense of my emotional state. Like, wow, I wasn't going to re-up my website because I figured, why spend the money since we'll be gone in a year.
Right. And
that was, it's hard for me to recapture that. Actually, not that hard because I always have sort of a sense of the omnipresent atomic holocaust that I've thought about since I was 8.
Right.
But it's been a great motivator. Actually, I found I did a lot of work after 9/11 where I was like, okay, got to get that book done. Okay, got to get that graphic novel out, and do those illustrations because it all seemed to be running on a time clock. But then again, that's also the time clock of life.
Well, I really liked that particular page, the Indomitable Human Spirit, because it reminded me of there was that whole issue after 9/11. The late night comedy shows, the talk shows had gone dark for a while, and there was the whole issue of when is it okay to laugh again? When is it okay to come back and make jokes? And
irony is dead.
Exactly, irony is dead. Ha! Like hell it was. But and I remember also, Howard Stern stayed on the air that particular day, the day of the attacks, and was trying to figure out. And he stayed on the air throughout, even when the talk shows went dead, the comedy shows went dead, and his feeling was, hey, life goes on. It's hard and it's dark, but life goes on, and people are still interested in Lesbian Dial-A-Date. What are you going to do?
Yeah, and it's better than thinking about doom.
Yeah. Now, I mentioned that a big selection of what's in the book would be great as standalone posters. Has any of this stuff been posters or?
It has indeed.
Okay.
There's an image that was the poster for the Mocha Festival last spring. There's an image that was a silkscreen poster that we did for the 9/11 issue of World War III. Many of them ended up as covers of magazines and in images in newspapers. So that was. It's also a collection of work that managed to reach print and often ended up lining a birdcage shortly thereafter.
Pardon me.
That was, so it's a historic document in that respect, and it captures, how how I have been capturing the city over a period of time, and but then also it has the sort of a diary aspect that a sketchbook is, and that it's ongoing for me. And I have there's a Spanish edition of the book that came out in the fall, an ebook version that's available for iPads you can get at the Apple Store now in English, and a French edition is going to be coming out in next fall, and that will have yet more New York work in it because it's an ongoing story. So even the moment I finish one publication, then there's more work that I've done that could be added to that pile.
It's nice. Got to make you feel good to see it come out and be available so widely.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is one of the things that's been happening more and more, and particularly happened when I lived in Mexico. I made a connection with a Mexican publisher who's been doing. I've done 4 books with them since I got back from Mexico 3 years ago, and also with French publishers and Spanish publishers and Brazil and Italy, and that's been as the market is shrinking here. I mean, it's definitely more difficult to do a graphic novel with a big publisher. I mean, there's still tons of opportunity, but it's also everybody's pretty, they're on the edge of their seats for what's going to happen next, and there's certainly moves towards ebooks and what's happening with new media is still shaking out. But in Europe, and in Mexico, South America, and other parts of the world, print is still very much alive, and so I can do a 4-color hardcover book with spot gloss and embossing and everything that I might want. And I am such a fan of print that to be able to do that, and even to occasionally, if there's a new edition of a book, to rejigger it so that it's even play with it some more and do different things. I just enjoy print so much.
You've been busy since last we spoke. You were kind enough to give me a cheat sheet. Some of the stuff here. Is it pronounced Osaka or Oaxaca?
Oaxaca.
Oaxaca. I'm so sorry to the Oaxaca.
No, it doesn't look like OAXACA doesn't look like it's going to be Oaxaca.
No. So that was you did the Diario de Oaxaca about your time in Mexico, right? I don't suppose you have a copy of that handy.
I have a French edition of it right here.
Of course,
that's one of them.
A French edition of the Mexican book, of course.
Yeah, I know. All translated into French, and there's also a bilingual Spanish-English edition that a new edition that just came out, and I actually added material because I kept going back to Mexico, and that's also out and around. And I did illustrated Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass for this Spanish editions, and there's Through the Looking Glass in Spanish, and here's Alice in Wonderland, nice. Which was a ball to do because especially in the shift from Bush to Obama, I found that I really got kind of burnt out I had a fairly constant stream of screaming tone in my work because I was so upset by what was going on with Bush. And it's not like I'm not still quite upset with what's going on with Obama and what's going on in the world. It's not like everything got repaired or everything's okay, but there was a definite zeitgeist shift that occurred, and I think I felt it, I think a lot of people felt it, where I just wanted to change my approach and tone, and it was nice to have a breather from this sort of high-pitched scream that I had running for 8 years. And so Alice in Wonderland was a great opportunity to dig in on something. And though curiously, what I found was when I did the illustrations for it, I found there was a lot of characters that the way Tenniel had originally used political figures in his work, I too was able to use political figures in mine, but sort of update them. So there's Ronald Reagan as the Duchess, the Duke is really a Duchess, and the Cheshire Cat managed to come out looking like there's the Red Queen, as Dick Cheney is portraying the Red Queen. So I didn't have to hang up my politics in order to do this, and yet there's my Richard Nixon Cheshire Cat,
right?
Because it kept on coming back, so it seemed appropriate.
And
but so I it wasn't. I don't want to hang up my spurs. And stop sharpening my pen. But I think the impact of being away from it and the political shift made me look at different possibilities for how to talk about what's going on, and that it was a really nice respite to be able to work on these solid single books also, and also reach a whole new audience in Mexico.
Mm-hmm. And I have to ask, because he just distracted attention from you entirely, who's your little friend on the couch?
My dog. Oh, that would be Leela.
Leela. Hi, Leela.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
She was. I was. Any moment now, she may burst out barking, but attack me, and I'll suddenly wrestle her down to the ground.
She was very cute. We saw her down to your right, twirling around a little bit, and then she jumped up and looked all around, and it was very cute. Not that we weren't all hanging on every word that you had to say.
Thank you. Yes. It's fascinating. I'm sure.
Now you've also got a Harvey Kurtzman related project, right?
Yep.
What's that?
Yep. I just finished doing a brief biography of Kurtzman. There's an upcoming project with Simon & Schuster that is going to be a number of different cartoonists doing biographies of other cartoonists, and that'll be out next year. But it was really interesting to delve into Kurtzman's life and in general. I mean, I'm finding teaching comics, I'm reading a lot about comics history, and it's really a pretty bottomless, I won't say pit, but you can keep excavating and finding new things. And as much as I've spent my whole life looking at comics and looking into them, I'm finding whole new areas and revisiting things. I mean, I'm of course reading Eisner's book on sequential art, and rereading Scott McCloud and all this, but then all sorts of just looking at old comic strips, and going back to Topfer and the early political cartoonists, and Gilray, and there's just a whole the lineage of that, which connects to all these different things that I'm interested in. I just find that the more I look into it, the more there is to look into. And I also find that one of the great things about living in New York is I have the opportunity to, say, visit Jules Feiffer or Arnold Roth or Al Jaffe, and these guys are connected to that whole history. And I feel a certain anxious is not exactly the right word, but I'm conscious of the fact that this history is the conveyor belt is moving, and some of these guys are not going to be around in a very short time,
right.
And guys like Eisner are already gone, and that I'm trying to make connections with people in the field who are connected to the history of it as often as I can.
Good idea. And just if this will help you or anyone else out, Arnold Roth, Al Jaffe, and Jules Feiffer have all been guests on Mr. Media in the last couple of years. So if you go to MrMedia.com, you can look up those interviews and hear them.
Excellent.
They're right in there alongside the one with Peter Kuper. This guy, he might amount to something one day.
I'm on that conveyor belt eventually. It keeps shifting forward as long as I don't fall off the side.
It's gonna happen to all of us, my friend.
Yep.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, let me tell everybody where to find your book. You can find Drawn to New York by Peter Kuper in great bookstores everywhere, or you can order it right now at a great price at MrMedia.com. We shill for Amazon, so it's a real order process. Peter, you website, Twitter, Facebook, any of that kind of stuff?
I do have a website, which is myname.com, and
that would be peterkuper.com. Myname.com probably is like GoDaddy or something.
Yeah, that's like Simon and Schuster.
I just want to clarify for your sake.
And also actually the New York book, you can get it, the Spanish edition of it through Amazon, but in English it's currently only available as an ebook. And I have expectations that it will come out as a hardcover. I mean, as a regular print book in English, but right now Spanish, soon to be French, but ebook now, and it looks quite awesome actually on an iPad. It's very strange. Being a Luddite and to some extent, although here we are doing a Skype interview, I was quite resistant to the idea of ebooks in general. But seeing the book with that sort of backlit quality, it's really quite amazing. And being able to flip the pages on an iPad it's a strange, I could feel the tremble of new media coming at me.
It's definitely moving in that direction, isn't it? Yeah. Well, Peter Kuper, always a pleasure. Nice to have you face to face, and good luck with the book. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Media, today.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. For more original interviews, surf over to our main website, mrmedia.com, mrmedia.com. If you've enjoyed today's show, subscribe for free to Mr. Media via email, RSS, or iTunes, and you'll never miss a show. Another good idea, download our new free Mr. Media mobile app in the Android market. You can also listen with a piece of string and a tin can in many parts of the internet. Show your support of Mr. Media by supporting our sponsors, including Audible. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/radio. Again, that's audibletrial.com/radio for your free audiobook. We're also supported by thepartyauthority.us. Call DJ Ira for all your party entertainment needs nationwide at 1-800-DIAL-DJs, or visit their website, thepartyauthority.us. If you've got an idea for a guest, a comment on today's show, or would like to advertise on Mr. Media Radio, email me directly at bob@mrmedia.com, mrmedia.com. You can also call our 24-hour listener line at 1-727-498-4711. Some messages may be used in an upcoming show. And unless you live next door to Mr. Media, there may be a toll charge. You can also follow Mr. Media on Facebook, Twitter, or our new YouTube and Vimeo video channels. Thanks so much for joining us today. I always appreciate you sharing a piece of your day with Mr. Media. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Hey everybody, this is Bob Andelman from Mr. Media. First of all, I want to thank you for years of support listening to this show. We're starting our 6th year, it's hard to believe, our 6th year as 2012 starts, and heading towards our 1,000th online podcast, audio and video. It's pretty amazing, frankly. I remember starting it several years ago thinking this will never last. And podcasts, that's as stupid a word as blogging. But here we are, starting our 6th year and heading up to 1,000 interviews. And I want to thank everybody for listening and supporting the show. I also want to tell you that one of the things that's been very helpful for this show is Stitcher Radio. Yes, this is sort of a commercial. Now, there are millions of smartphone apps in the world, but I only use one several times a day, Stitcher Radio. I build my own radio station to listen to broadcast and online shows when I want and in the order I want. CNN News Update, Onion Radio News, WTF with Mark Maron, MSNBC's Morning Joe, Studio 60, the TechCrunch headlines, and of course, Mr. Media. It's free. It works on iPhone, Android, BlackBerry, Palm Pre, and much more. And you can get it for free for yourself. Try it out. I guarantee you're going to love it. Stitcher.com/mrmedia. That's Stitcher.com/Mr. Media. You're going to love it. And thanks again for supporting the show.